Since we're on the topic, right, I guess I'll just pivot to the next question. Like, how much leverage do you think these first-time buyers should actually take? Like, in terms of the mortgage and everything, how many percent of their salaries you think is like a healthy ratio that these buyers should take?
Actually, I'm not sure if I'm professional enough to comment. I think no one
No,
should
it's
take.
okay.
Yeah.
Aside from Aaron, me, I'm also not a professional. I'm just speculating everything. No, wait,
Yeah.
just go for it. Go for it.
I think it shouldn't be more than 30%. I really feel that.
Yeah, that's kind of like my answer. So 30, anything more than a 30% is, to me, it's hell. I feel because I've been like on a 33% debt before, so I know how it feels to be like when you're servicing a debt that eats up 33% of your salary and feels like shit. It
Yeah,
really feels like shit.
and there's possibilities that that may go up because of the interest rate as well. So that's pretty scary.
How much of like leeway or space that you would actually give if you factor in the interest rate increasing?
Actually, when it comes to calculating interest rate, right, I won't follow like the current interest rate. I will add in more. Like let's say when I'm using the interest rate calculator, right? Like for example, now it's like 3.1 or maybe increase to 3.5. So I will factor in, I will use 4 or 4.3 just to be safe. To know that actually at 4.3, even if it increased to 4.3, will I be able to comfortably pay for it still? So I won't go for minimum interest rate. I will go for higher, like when I'm calculating lah.
Just to be on the conservative side, right?
Yeah.
And this is what Aaron mentioned just now, the sensitivity testing,
Yeah.
right, Aaron?
Yeah.
How much leverage should you take, and like what kind of the sensitivity testing that should actually go into the analysis before someone commits like 30 or 40% of their income to debt?
Okay. I love this question because this is the execution part of debt. So basically, I can share from experience, and also amongst my many clients, right, that whatever Steph has mentioned, 30% is the absolute max, is probably a very good guideline, especially if you're Malaysian. Okay, why? 30%, right, gives you a very good, comfortable buffer because actually, right, in terms of personal finance, it's not uncommon to find people who will go up to 50%. Okay, but the reason why you want to stick to 30% is because you need that additional 20% as a buffer in case, as what Steph has mentioned, the interest rate goes up. All right. And for most Malaysians, you don't just have your home loans to pay. Okay, you also have a car loan most of the time. Right. You also have car loans to pay. And generally, if you cap it at 30%, then if the car loan takes another 5 to 10%, then you're looking at 40%. Right. So the last 10% is used as a buffer in the event that the interest rate goes up. Because as I have illustrated just now, for every single percentage point increase in interest rates, right, your cash outlay component increases about 10 to 15%. So assuming, let's say, the interest rate goes up by 3%, you're talking about a 40% increment of your cash outlay, which actually translates to be about a net 10% increase of your debt commitment lah, right? Which is why in Singapore, right, the magical number is 23%, because our CPF, which is similar to your EPF, right, 23% of our monthly commitments, right, actually goes towards buying a house. So the government has already predetermined that the percentage outlay is 23%, and that actually is very comfortable for most people to actually afford a house without actually coming out any cash. And basically, we just use our CPF to fund the house in Singapore. So it works in Singapore, and I'm pretty sure it also works in Malaysia. But I think the hard part for most people, especially young couples, to grasp, right, is that when you tell them, right, that they can only use 30%, then when the problem is that when they look at the options which they have, most of the time they are concerned that it is not enough to get what they want. Correct? Because whenever you set a limit, let's say 30%, right? Sometimes people will take a step back and they look, with 30%, you calculate this much, then you go to a show flat. Then the actual place that you want, right, actually might even take up sometimes 50% of your income. And that's like taking, as what Steph says, a bare minimum like interest, bare minimum interest without any sensitivity tests. Although 30% is a good guideline, I would say that most people, especially young couples, if they want a home that is what they want, they tend to go and stretch 50, sometimes 80%. Okay, in this particular instance, right, then you need to do what Ryan do, which is very simple. basically you need to earn more money. It's a simple solution, right? Because I mean, two things have to give. It's either you go for something which you can afford, or you basically just earn more money, realistically speaking. So it goes back to our career podcast, which is the previous episode, where you need to plan for your career to earn more money, to afford the things that you want, all right? Or you basically just start out small, as what Steph has mentioned. There's no harm in starting out something small. You know why? Because the beauty about property, right, and the beauty about real estate, right, is that when you start, okay, early as something that's affordable, you actually build equity on the home, okay? You actually build equity on the home compared to renting. Because let's say you rent, right? Let's say you're paying like 1,000 in Singapore. Let's say you pay about 1,500. You rent. After 25 years, you still have to continue pay rent. All right. Now, people like me and Ryan, we can do that, okay, because we know that we're very disciplined to invest money into things like equity, into things like high performing businesses, high performing investment ideas that can probably 10 to 20x within that time frame. But I would say the large majority of people, right, 99.9% of people, right, most of them, right, they do not have that discipline to invest the savings that they would have gotten, right, from renting. So essentially, you go back to the mantra, right, that people buy property because they need to be chased by a tiger to basically discipline them to invest into asset building properties lah. So in this case, even though some people, right, they say they buy 50%, right, they put in 50%, but to them, the couple is okay because they don't invest their money. They're not going to buy shares. They're not going to buy equity. They're not going to buy crypto. So to them, the house is an asset which they are building. And anyway, after 35 years, they're fully paid. Then they own an asset, right? So I mean, there's many ways to think about this asset class, but I will say that for the many years that I have often viewed unfavorably towards the property asset class, right? I always never ever dispute it, because I always know that there's an angle, right, where there is a particular portion of people, right, who basically just not comfortable owning equity or stock investments. That's why they prefer property, because it's something they can see, something they can touch. And I think the fact of the matter of what makes property work in the event that you make sure that it's within your means, is that it keeps you invested, provided that you buy it at a fair value.
Yeah, basically the monthly mortgages that you pay is like forcing yourself to DCA every month. You have no choice. You have to pay it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
basically the end result is you see the end of the tenure, right? The end of 35 years, basically you don't have to pay rent. So even if let's say you don't sell your property, you have a roof over your head. You get what I mean? Which is quite invaluable for some people. Like my mom, she's not an investor. So I think the best thing that she did was that she buy a house and then now she doesn't have to pay rent. You get what I mean? Whereas for
Yeah.
like people like me, people like Ryan, we are, I mean, I would say that we know how to invest our money, right? And we can do this because in a way we know how to invest our money, but for certain people, right, who are not very in tune with like investment classes, property, I would say that the property market, if you have very good professionals working for you, very good agents, right? Like people who know what they're doing, people like Stephanie.comdo, follow her on Instagram, know what they're doing, right? Is that you get things at fair value, and the likelihood that property drops as much as 08, 09, right? The risk can be mitigated, right? If you buy it at a fair value. Yeah.
Yes, or under market value.
I would say the risk in terms of the risk, right, is a lot less in property as compared to buying a business, because in many ways I think property, the reason why it has held out so well is because it's very difficult for you to remove that fundamental belief that a roof over your head is a necessity in life. It's very tough, but we can make many arguments about it, but the truth of the matter is, if you are in a place where it's an Asian culture, right, Asians, we tend to like to own a roof over our head, and that's something which I do not foresee going away anytime soon. For many cases, the youngsters might say that we prefer to rent, but in a situation, right, where buying a house is cheaper than renting, like in Singapore, I would say that most people will buy.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it just makes much more sense when the mortgage that you're paying is less than the rental. It's just a better financial decision all over.
Yeah, and of course you have to weigh that against building equity also, because sometimes you do have to factor in the fact that after 25 or 35 years, you don't have to pay rent anymore. So you also have to value that at the end of 35 years, how do you value that rent-free asset? You get what I mean? Because like, okay, the way I do it is quite simple, right? Basically, like for example, I pay 35 years, I buy the entire amount that I put in over 35 years, let's say it's 1.5 million, right? Then I just basically just take an interest rate of that 1.5 million. So for example, if let's say I want 4%, so basically I just value the cash flow at 4% at the end of 35 years, growing at maybe like 5% a year. So for example, I will just value the end asset rental to me, rent free, is about 60,000, maybe 60,000 ringgit every year that I don't have to pay. So that's how I value it.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think that's something which is quite, that's like the easiest way to value that structure which when you buy a property.
But we
Oh,
will
then
talk about risk, right?
yeah.
You mentioned just now there's a higher risk in equity compared to property, but I kind of like disagree because I'm coming from an angle, right, where I would think that getting yourself into a mortgage actually means that you are holding on to an illiquid asset which you cannot readily sell compared to like stocks or crypto. But of course, in crypto, when you buy crypto or equities or like the high performing growth stocks, those are volatility, and but there's just like a nice little balance between liquidity and volatility. And does that make sense? Like there's a nice balance. If like you go for the stability, then there's like just much less liquidity on the property market. But vice versa, if you go for like equities, there's like just much more liquidity. You can sell whenever or you can buy whenever. But it also comes at a price of volatility.
I would say that to clarify on the risk, I would say that my main point of view when it comes to risk, right, when it comes to asset classes, is whether or not the individual can actually execute when shit hits the fan. You get what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And
that makes sense.
in the case of property, right, even if shit hits the fan, the likelihood that the person continue to pay mortgage is actually a lot higher than a person to continue to DCA into equity. Because I have seen it in practice, right, that even in the COVID crisis and then in 2011, 2012, right, when the market was falling, I very rare see people, right, they actually continue to invest their money. In fact, some of them even stop their DCA, And I think the worst part for I think for equity, right, is that you DCA into a dying business.
Oh yeah, that's the worst. That's actually
Yeah.
the worst.
So like I guess it depends on the individual on how well tuned they are in the asset class. And I would say that the reason why I say property market is sort of less risky is because it is quite I would say that in a way because it is so competitive, the market is so competitive that in many ways, if you actually are just a little bit prudent about it, right, the likelihood that you lose your entire wealth is not as high as equity if you're not careful in crypto.
The worst case scenario, you end up with a house
In a ghost
to
town lah.
yeah,
That's the
but
worst case scenario.
you still have like a house for your retirement or something, a roof over your head when you're older. Yeah, it's
Yeah
not too
lah.
bad. You see, the downsides are not as bad as like equities. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean
that I would agree.
we have seen the repercussions of what happened last week, right? When we saw like the one of the biggest like crypto projects went to shit. There were many Singaporeans, right, who actually like sold their house and then like took a reverse mortgage. They took loans against their house and they basically invested everything into Terra and Luna. And then when that crashed, literally they had to start from scratch. They like went from 2.4. Some of them went from like multi-millions, went back all the way down to zero. So it was,
Wow.
I mean, this is a very perfect illustration example of human psyche, and that is when facts change. You'll realize that most people tend to not change their views in a down market because I think it is very having invested so many years, right, I sort of come to the conclusion that people don't want to believe it, right, when facts change, and they tend to be quite stubborn into holding on to assets even though the facts have changed, right. There are many examples of this. You look at when Amazon was rising, people say that Walmart would take the lead, and then now you say that then in the instance of like Tesla, where they start to grow so much and then they say that they will never take the lead, and then now you say that there's crypto, Bitcoin taking over like the monetization, and people will say that there's no value in it, when even though final settlement is actually a very valuable like thing to have. It's a very actually like Bitcoin, the final settlement network, is something which is extremely valuable, I think, to many people, because the across space and time, right, it is property, digital property, which has never been done before, right? So that's why I invest inside Bitcoin. I've done my research, I've done my homework, and that's why I invested, right? So I mean, these are some examples, right, where when you invest your money into equity, right, you have to understand that in the business environment, they generally change every 5 to 10 years. There's usually waves of innovation and change that happens every 5 to 10 years, which means that investor, right, of a business or a singular stock, right, short of buying the S&P 500, you have to be willing to pivot, which I find right, most people cannot do because they always end up buying things like Bursa Stock Exchange. Even in Singapore, they tend to buy things like STI. Yeah, and that's why I say, like, in the property market, it takes usually about 10 years before the market really change, because like the speed of how the market change really depends on how fast you can build the buildings, right? So in many ways, the property market, it just moves slower than the equity market because it's not as liquid. So in many ways, right, therefore, if you're talking about 25-year time horizon, I would say that property will not change as much as business climate.
Right.
Yeah, that's why when you talk about like risk, right, sometimes people, they just are not that comfortable to see much change. They prefer something which is very predictable. They sort of know, like, 20-25 years, they can still see that, it will still be okay. That's why they buy property. Yeah, it all ties back down to who you are as an investor, as an individual, and then, like, what do you want to achieve in your wealth building goals. Because there's not one way to do it. There's multiple ways. But as you mentioned, Ryan, I like what you mentioned is that you need to have a very good balance. You cannot just, like, I would say that all into one is not a very good way to go about it. I think, like, end of the day, I do advocate for making sure that you at least, even if you don't invest in the other asset class, right, at least acknowledge that there is opportunity there, and then you just have to acknowledge that that's just not for you, which is what I did in property lah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm also not a property guy because, like, I'm just not too interested in, like what Stephanie said just now. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You have to engage lawyers, you have to engage your property agent. I'm just not into that because it's just way too much work for me. To me, like, equity is like, I just put in my money and then I deposit my money and I click the buy button and then I'm invested. It's a 10-minute process versus like how many months of due diligence and survey on the site. So I'm just not up for that.
Yeah. And it depends on the person's strength and the advantage that a person have, right? If the person is in property, then it's definitely more advantageous for a person to invest in property.
Yeah, definitely that's the unfair advantage that a person who's in the industry has over, like, more layman investors.
Yeah.